Alright, 213, 235. Inspection switches track crossing and lifting railing and some of the other transition devices of the movable bridges. 235. Except for the paragraph C with the section each of the switch and turnout training crossing the movable bridge lifts up rail. Some of the other transition devices shall be inspected on for at least monthly. Paragraph 8 prescribes the frequently methods of inspection switches, the turnout track crossing movable bridges, the lifted rail, some of the other transition devices. Track owner qualified persons may examine the records of the conducting field investigation practice. Every inspectors confirm the track owners on the foot inspection of each of the switch turnout track and crossing and movable lift the bridge rail assembly at least monthly. 235B each, but the switch for the class 3 or 5 track that has led held the position only with the operation mechanism. One of the connecting records connecting rod should be operated with all the position during one exemption with every 3 months. Each switch is a class 3 or 5 track which held normally reverse position. Only one connection of the rod is required to operate with the own in all positions during one track is being one owner than three every 3 months. Example: the switch has more than one connection rod. The switch also has a lock rod. A rod connecting a switch to a switch control circuit. The point detector is not considered to be a rod that can hold the switch in a position. The requirement is designed to emphasize the importance of the non-redundant mechanism. Thorough inspection is accomplished by operating the switch mechanism to allow the comprehensive inspection of these components. Inspectors should observe the various switch components, determine their functional design, the assessing of these missed components for the integral safety of the operation, the proper operation. The missing point of the data inspector should be operated with appropriate codes under the statute 213-133 with the phrase all positions intended for the cover to slip in the lab of the three-way switches. 235C. In the case of the track, there are usually less than one to move each switch of the turnout track crossing the movable bridge, lift the rail, assembly of the transition devices shall be inspected foot and bare before used. Lift rails have unique properties and functions. The discussion will focus on the case of the magnesium alloy type of the rail lift. The assembly is provided with the transition between the fixed and span, the movable span with the on-lifting bridges. The swinging bridges, bascles, and lift rails are made with the three pieces of the swing bridge is the section of the fixed span and the section of the movable span of the rocker. Analogous to the rail, some respect the magnesium lift rail provided with the running surface similar to the rail joint, and those rails that end up with the bridge span with made with the magnesium alloy appropriate with the appearance of the frog. The magnesium lift rail has a tampered section with the reduced shock design provided with the transfer of the wheel to take place on one span rather than between the span of the track bridge. For the maintenance of the personnel familiar with the magnesium steel lift rails, point on the cracks generally progress slowly. Railroad maintenance officials advocate proper maintenance to prevent the reducing the cracking of the magnesium lift rail because of the deformation of magnesium over the time. The recommended with the metal flow over the ground at the wheel contact point with the reduce the preventing the cracks. Railroad maintenance personnel all emphasize that the bridge itself can be aggravated with the wear of the deterioration of magnesium steel lift rails when the bridge needs to be adjusted or repaired. The condition of the bridges, for example, is an important factor for the maintenance of such. In some of these policy regarding speeds of the magnesium lift rails are set with each of the railroads. Some of the railroads require 25 maximum speed on all lifting rails, regardless of the condition. For the reduction of the train speed should be placed on the lifting rails to deteriorate the prohibitive levels. In deciding to place the speed restriction, remove the lift rail from the surface of the railroad. Consider the wide range of factors, including the amount of traffic, the reconnection, the condition of the lift rail itself, and similar when evaluating magnesium rail lifting rail. Inspectors must consider the crack of the magnesium casting not known to promulgate slowly. Although the cracks are known to promulgate slowly, they may be more hazardous under certain bridge conditions such as deteriorated check. Inspectors caution against the citing statute 213-113 defective rail to describe crack of the magnesium casting running surface of the magnesium lifting rail appliance. Specific concern for the safety of magnesium steel lift rails must be immediately brought to the attention of appropriate railroad managers and discussed with the regional track specialist. General guidance. Inspection conducted with the vehicle are not required sufficient to determine the compliance. Therefore, each of the switch of the turnout track crossing and lift rail assembly of the transit device removable bridges will be inspected by walking inspection before the FRA inspector considered unit activity inspected outlined in Chapter 2 of this manual. In Statute 213-237, inspection for the rail, in addition to the track inspection required in Statute 213-233, the continuous search for the internal defects should be made on all rails, Class 4 and 5 track, and the Class 3 track over the passenger trains operate at least once every 40 million gross tons or once a year. Whichever interval is shorter, Class 3 track over the passenger train does not operate such a search that should be made at least once every 30 million gross tons once a year. Whichever the interval is longer, this paragraph A is effective January 1st, 1999. Guidance. The inspection frequency requirements stated with the paragraph considered both of the passage time of the accumulated tonnage since the last inspection. Several methods employed with the railroad estimated tonnage, but they are on their only estimated cannot be considered the precise, accurate. In addition, schedule the rail detection curve the influence by many factors such as available equipment in service was contracted with the equipment failure of various scheduling problems which may arise. For Class 3 track open freight operations conducted with the date of the most recent inspection defining with the beginning with the new inspection cycle before the expiration time of the tonnage limits, whichever is longer than inspection internal rail defects must be conducted for Class 4 and 5 track. Class 3 track over the passenger train operated date that must be reinspected will define the beginning of the new inspection cycle before the expiration time of the tonnage limits, whichever is shorter. Inspection of the internal rail defects must be conducted. Language in section 213, 237A that refers to 213, 233 track inspection indicated that many of the rail defects as well as conditions caused with wear or damage cannot be avoided with the discovery that is required in the internal search for the detector car or other specialized detection equipment. Some of the railroads have elected to perform more internal rail inspection than that require under the track safety standard intervals between tests typically range from 20 to 30 million gross tons between 20 to 30 days. The typical intervals define good baseline for the general accepted maintenance practices. The industry rail quality managers consider these limits are points of the departure and adjustment test schedules of accounting for the effects of specific track characteristics, maintenance, traffic, and weather. The annual testing requirement for Class 4 and Class 5 track, Class Track 3 over the passenger operated based on the risk factors associated with the freight train speeds and passenger train operation. Selecting appropriate frequency of the rail testing, complexity tasking involving many different factors should include but are not limited to temperature, differential curvature, residual stress, rail section, and cumulative tonnage. Past rail test results taking consideration above all the factors. Railroad FRA research suggests that 40 million gross tons is the maximum tonnage that should be hauled between rail tests and still allow safe window for the appropriate detection of the internal rail flaw before the propagates from the size of the surface of failure for FRA accident indecent data points to the need for the inclusion for all the Class 3 track of the railroad testing program. The requirement states that the Class 3 track over which the passenger train does not operate should be tested once every year or once every 30 million gross tons, whichever is longer. 237B, inspection equipment should be capable of detecting defects between the joint bars and in the area enclosed by the joint bars. The equipment used is capable of detecting defects in the joint area as well as the body of the rail. Two separately systems must be used with the meeting of the requirement provided that each of the used before expiration time of the tonnage limits is required in the specification. 237C, each defective rail should be marked with a highly visible marking on both sides of the web and base. Each of the defective rail must be marked with a highly visible marking on both sides of the web and base to prevent the reuse of the rail. Defective identity with the control numbers are not required on the web or the base, but used with the railroad for inventory purposes. Inspectors should be aware of the rail that certain defects such as a bolt hole crack may have the defective portion cropped, the remaining portion of the place and back. In terms of the track, the owner may remove the defective parts and markings and non-defective portion of such of a rail. 237D, but if the person is not assigned the operator of the rail defect detection equipment being used with the term is that due to the rail surface condition, valid surface internal defects cannot be made with the particular length of the track. The test with the particular length of the track cannot be considered the search of the internal defects under Statute 213, 237A. This paragraph D is not retroactive to the test performed prior to September 21st, 1998. The paragraph in the paragraph E addressed for the situation valid search for the internal rail defects cannot be met because of the rail surface condition. Several types of the technology presently employed with the continuous searching of the internal rail defects, some of the varying means of displaying monitoring such search signals. A continuous search with the intent to mean uninterrupted search, whatever the technology is being used, so that there is no segments of the rail not tested. If the test is interrupted, e.g. the result of the rail surface condition that inhibit the transmission of the return of the signal, then the test over the segment of the rail is not valid because it was not continuous. Therefore, non-test and non-divided are absolute technical terms. Rather, the provision will leave the determination of the rail testing equipment operator who is uniquely qualified on the equipment. Paragraph D is not a retroactive test performed prior to September 21st, 1998. 237E, if the valid search for the internal defects cannot be conducted for the reasons described in paragraph D of the section, the track owner shall perform before the expiration of the time of the tonnage limits, conduct a valid search for the internal defects, reduce operation speed maximum to 25 miles per hour until the such valid search of the internal defects can be made, remove the rail from the service. As the paragraph specifies the three options available to the railroad following non-test due to the railroad surface condition. The option must be exercised prior to the expiration of the time of the tonnage limit specified in paragraph 8 of the section. If doubts existing concerning defective rail disposition, the inspector should review the track owner's records under statute 213-241C. The conducting record inspection inspector determine the requirements of section 213-130-A2 and 213-237E are in compliance, but they have determined the valid inspection have occurred with the expiration of time of the tonnage must be determined before non-compliance and action. Broken rails continue to be one of the leading cause of the train accidents. Inspectors should examine the records to ensure the railroad internal rail inspection frequency compliance and should be alerted during track inspection to any of the rail that marks as defective. During excellent investigation, where a broken rail is factored, the inspector should provide with complete information on the type of the defects result of the last rail inspection, type of the inspection equipment used, the track used, and signs to the last inspection, accumulated tonnage on the rail, the sense of the guidance under the statute 213-237D for the discussing the situation where a valid search for internal rail defects could not be made because of the rail surface condition. Alright, 239, special inspection. In the event of a fire, flood, severe storm, or other occurrence which might have damaged the track structure, a special inspection should be made with the track involved as soon as possible after the occurrence and if possible before the operation of any train over the track. Counts the section in general nature because of the non-practical specifically conditions that could trigger the special inspection with the special manner of the timing. The section should not be meant to imply with the train operation must necessarily stop until special inspection is made. However, all special inspections should be conducted with the primary purpose of determining whether the track structure is safe for the conditioning of operation trains. The inspector should destroy direct the review of the significant impact of the railroad operation in regard to the storms that is discussed in an applicable safety advisory. Because of the number of the train derailments have been caused and unaccepted track damage from the moving water in the path, the FRA deemed it appropriate to issue the safety advisory 97-1 with the recommended procedure of the relatively deflected industry practice of the special track inspection procedures consists of proper notification, dispatch, or expected bad weather limits for the train speed on all tracks subject to flood damage. Following the issuance of flash flood warning until a special inspection can be performed. Identification of bridges carrying class 4 highway track that are vulnerable to flooding other than passenger train operation. Visibility information about each of the bridges, such as identifying marks, those that may be called to perform special instructions. Training programs of refreshing training of those who perform special instructions. Availability of the bridge maintenance engineering, employing to evaluate the rail track inspectors' finding. Although the advisory contains a sample list of sudden events that routinely occur in the nature of the provision not limited to occurrence listed only the natural disaster, section 213-239 addresses the need to inspect the after the other conclusion, which includes such natural phenomena as temperature exchanges, extremes, as well as unexpected events or human cause, e.g. vehicle that fails with the track on an overhead bridge, the water main break, that the floods the track of the roadbed, the short terrace activity that damages the track. Interpretation is not new. The FRA has always viewed the section to encompass sudden events of all kinds that affect the safety and integrity of the track. Inspectors should determine the procedure had been established by the railroad to comply with statute 213-239. Mindful of the advisory procedure with the non-mandatory procedure should include the methods applied with the railroad receive the information of the surveyor, whether we receive the information, what is done with the information. When the railroad is not possible, track damaging occurrence, the special instruction must be made. The track owner may be designated any official be responsible to make determination on whether the special inspection under statute 213-239 is required. The designation is not limited to any certain craft, but the official must be trained and qualified to ensure proper inspection was conducted. Track safety standards does not require the railroad to keep the written record of the special instruction over the SRA's. Inspector will not have any such records to determine the railroad compliance with this section. As a result, the FRA inspector should look at the other sources of the train dispatcher, high rail occupancy records to determine the compliance. Alright, 213-241 inspection records. Each owner of the track of which parts apply with shall record and keep a record of each of the inspection required to perform on the track under the subpart. If the track owner required to keep the record of each inspection according to the requirements under statute 213-4, 213-119, 213-233, and 213-235. Each of the inspection reporting under these sections must be prepared on the day of the inspection signed by the person making the inspection. The track owner may develop any form that meets the requirements of the track safety standards, or the owner requires an only inspection on more frequent intervals specified in the statute 213-230cc. Only requirements preparing and maintaining inspection record to comply with the minimum inspection frequency. The section is explicitly concerned with the record information contained with the inspection records, most specifically track inspection according with the provision under statute 213-233b3 of the date of the inspection, location, nature of any of the defect, remedial action taken from the person making the inspection. Railroad inspection reports with the required to reflect the actual conditions that exist on the track structure. The railroad inspector must include the specified measurement of the track parameter whenever appropriate when describing the nature of the defect. Statute 213-244b For example, the wide gauge exceeds allowable for Class 4 trucks 58 inches, track slower or order than 10 miles per hour. When the defects discovered, the track owner inspectors immediately initiate the remedial action in accordance with 213.5. If the speed restriction is used, the remedial action reduce the speed shown in the inspection records. Railroad track inspections are required to list all the deviation from track safety standards on their inspection. The FRA inspectors shall review the railroad inspection record to determine the reported data accurately reflects the track condition as they exist in the field. The railroad inspectors are not limited to recording deviations from track safety standard railroad maintenance items. The FRA inspectors should comply with the defects that find in the railroad inspector's report to determine the level of compliance with the railroad inspection program. If the multiple tracks are being inspected, the directors must be designated the track remains versed on any of the tracks not inspected, duly visible obstruction of excessive distance if the required in statute 213-233. When two qualified persons inspect the multiple tracks in accordance with the statute 213-233b, one of the two reports may be optional or prepared. If one of the report is used, the report must be include the notation such as the signature and initials, printed name of the second inspector. Rail inspector records must be maintained with the track owner at least 2 years after the inspection. 1 year after the last run, remedial action in the record must specify the location and nature of any of the rail defects through any internal inspection. Remedial action taken on the date thereof. The record may consist of log sheets combined with the standard rail defect change-out reports, computer records, or other data kept by the track owner containing all the record information. Rail inspection records must specify location of any of the rail. Do this rail serve the condition probe with the railroad conducting with the valid search for the internal defects at the required frequency. A valid search cannot be conducted before and the time the tonnage frequency expires. The remedial action day of the remedial action must be recorded on the inspection records. 241B, each of the record of the inspection under the statute 213.4, 213.119, 213.233, and 213.235 shall be prepared each of the day inspected with the made sign with the person making the inspection record shall specify the track inspection date, inspection location, nature of any deviation from the requirements of this part of the remedial action taken for the person making the inspection. The owner designates the location which of the original shall be maintained for at least 1 year after the inspection covered the record. The owner shall also designate one location within 100 miles of each of the state with which they conduct the operation where the copies of the records will apply with those operations to have either maintained or can be avoided viewed following the 10 days maintenance notice of the Federal Railroad Administration. The FRA has added to statute 213.119 to this list of section paragraph B, thereby requiring the inspection joints made by the pursuant to 213.119 comply with the inspection records requirements found in 213.241b. The review and compliance with the section inspector should determine the track owner properly recording the location date at which each switch has a held position only on the operating mechanism connecting rod and are operated with every 3-month period. Statute 213.235c, in addition with the record, should reflect that each side was actually traversed on vehicle on foot. The record frequency 213.233. The regulation allows railroad to designate location with 100 miles of each of the state designated location where the inspector can view the record. Inspector is required to give 10 days in advance notice before conducting the record, keeping the inspection of the designation location. The regulation does not require railroads to maintain records for these designated locations, only to be able to provide viewing of the at locations within 10 days after the location. Track safety standards stipulates locations of 100 miles after each state rather than the location in each of the state. Accommodate those railroads whose operation may cross the state lines are only a few miles. In those cases, the railroad could designate a location in the neighbor state, provided the location within 100 miles of the state border. Records must be kept at least 1 year of the inspection covered by the report, and appropriate with the inspector, except all the records will be available to inspection upon the date of the location. 241C, rail inspection records shall be specified the date of the inspection, location, and nature of the internal defects, and the remedial action taken on the date thereof. The location of the intervals track is not tested per to statute 213.237d. The owner shall retain the rail inspection record for at least 2 years for the after inspection for 1 year after the remedial action is taken. Guidance. The paragraph requires the track owner to record any location with the proper rail with inspection guidance performed requires of the rail surface condition. Section 213.237d to specify the rail surface condition prohibits the rail conducting proper rail search, rail defects. The test for the rail does not fulfill the requirements of statute 213.237a that requires search of the internal defects of special intervals. Subsection C requires a record keeping those instances. Alright, 241D, each of the owner required to keep the inspection records under such of the section shall make those records available for inspection copying the Federal Railroad Administration. 241E, for the purpose of complying with the requirements of this section, the owner of the track may maintain transfer record with electronic transmission storage retrieval, provided that the electronic system may design with the integrity of each of the record maintained through the appropriate level of security, such as recognition with the electronic signature or other means uniquely identified with the initiating person as an author of the record. No two persons have the same electronic identity. Electronic storage of each of the records shall be initiated with the person making the inspection within 24 hours following the completion of that. inspection. Electronic system shall ensure that each of the records can be modified in any way that replaces one record and transmitted and stored. Any amendment to the record shall be electronically stored or part with the record with the amendments. Each of the amendments to record and uniquely identify the person making the amendment. Electronic system shall provide the maintenance and inspection records as originally submitted without the corruption of lost data. Paper copy of electronic records amendment to those records they may be necessary to document compliance with the part that shall be made available for the inspection of the compound appearing on the Federal Road Administration locations. Paragraph and B of this section and track inspection records shall be kept available to the person who performed this inspection to perform subsequent inspection. The paragraph contains the requirements for the maintaining and retrieving electronic record of the track inspection. These allow each for the railroad to design an electronic system as long as the system meets the specified criteria for the safeguard and integrity of the authentication. Each of the record of the provision also requires the record railroads provide available copies, paper copies of electronic records where needed, but the FRA inspectors are provided with railroad track inspectors. Tracker owner may elect to maintain and transfer record through electronic transmission storage retrieval procedure. Each record must have sufficient secretary to maintain integrity with the record level. Security must identify the person making the inspection as the author of the record. Two individuals will have share of the same electronic signature or identity. The individual uses an electronic signature to identify their own violation of the personal liability action should be considered for all the parties involved. The integrity of the electronic inspection record system is extremely sensitive issue. Should the system integrity compromise, the inspector should immediately contact the appropriate regional track specialist. Should the regional track specialist be unavailable, the inspector will notify the appropriate regional administrator, headquarters track division, and will also be notified. The system must ensure that no record can be replaced, deleted, or modified in any way that once the record has been transmitted or stored. Each of the amendments to the record shall be stored and separate from the records as amends. Each amendment must identify the person making the amendment that have sufficient security for the main aim. The integrity of the amendment for electronic records or inspector records must be completed with the date of the right inspector or the computer temporary on the paper. The electronic record must be uploaded with the permanent electronic storage systems where the record will be maintained for 1 year. The uploading of each inspection record must be completed within 24 hours following the completion of the inspection. An advantage of electronic system is associated with reduction of paperwork. Therefore, inspectors must rely varying on the terminal monitoring screen whenever the method is available to viewing by the railroad. Although printed records must be made available, the FRA inspectors are discouraged from requesting paper copies of electronic records unless necessary to documentation non-compliance. A paper copy of the electronic record may be marked original, included with the documentation necessary for the violation report for the recommendation civil penalty. Railroad inspection records will be furnished upon the request of the location specified with the railroad. Required paragraph B of the section of paper contact with electronic inspection record amendment will be made available to the railroad inspector of any subsequent railroad inspector performing inspection of the same territory on request. Alright, we're going to skip the appendixes, but I'm going to go over them in a video real quick.